1 in 3 American seniors say they've been left out of family events because of their age. Last summer, I found out my grandpa was one of them, and I wasn't about to let it slide. It was early June in Colorado. The kind of morning where the air still carries a hint of spring, but the sun is already promising summer. I was sitting at the small kitchen table in my mother's house, the TV humming softly in the background with a weather forecast. The smell of yesterday's coffee lingered in the air, mixed with the faint scent of peppermint oil. Grandpa's favorite for his aching knees. My name's David. I'm 29, born and raised here in Colorado. My grandpa, Frank, is 78. He's a Navy veteran who once drove across 3 states just to see me graduate college. He's the man who showed up at every family event, from holiday dinners to Little League games, even when it meant sitting in a folding chair for hours. But over the last few years, his health has slowed him down. His steps are smaller, his rest breaks more frequent, though he does his best to hide it. That morning, I found him in the living room, carefully rearranging the framed photos on the mantel. He straightened the one of me in my cap and gown, then picked up an old navy patch he'd recently had framed. He handled it like it was something fragile and irreplaceable. That was Grandpa. Careful, deliberate. Always making sure the people and memories he loved were front and center. I didn't know it yet, but within an hour I'd hear something that would hit me harder than I expected. From where I sat in the kitchen, I could hear voices coming from my sister's phone on speaker. She'd joined a group call with some of our cousins. They were planning the annual summer trip to the beach, a tradition our family had kept for over 2 decades. I smiled at first, picturing the boardwalk, the smell of saltwater taffy, the sound of waves. Then I heard it. "Don't tell Grandpa," someone said, almost laughing. "He'll slow us down." The words landed heavy. I froze, waiting to hear someone speak up, to say it wasn't right. No one did. They moved on to talk about hotel rooms and dinner reservations like nothing had happened. I looked into the living room. There was Grandpa, sitting in his recliner, carefully wrapping a small box in birthday paper. The card next to it had my cousin's name on it, the same cousin who had just suggested leaving him behind. His hands shook slightly, but the paper lay smooth against the box. He even added a bow, pressing it down with the care of someone who believes every gift should feel special, no matter how small. In that moment, a pit formed in my stomach. Family is supposed to be the people who show up for you, who make room for you. Not just when it's easy, but especially when it's not. And yet, here was the man who had made space for everyone else being quietly pushed aside. I didn't say anything right then, but a thought lodged itself in my mind and wouldn't leave. It's easy to talk about family first, until family becomes inconvenient. If you've ever believed that love means inclusion, even when it's not the most convenient thing, then you already understand the weight of what I was feeling that morning. The question is, when the moment comes, will you speak up? Or will you let the silence decide for you? That night, the thought was still gnawing at me. I tried distracting myself, did some work on my laptop, scrolled through emails, even watched an old movie Grandpa and I used to love. But no matter what I did, the memory of those words kept replaying. "Don't tell Grandpa. He'll slow us down." It wasn't just what they said. It was how casually they said it, like leaving him out wasn't cruel, just practical. I was on my way to refill my glass of water when I heard it again, the sound of my sister's voice on speakerphone. She was in the den, half laughing as she talked to the cousins. I stopped just outside the doorway. "Okay, so we've got 6 confirmed for the beach house," she was saying. "That works out perfectly for the rental car." Someone else chimed in. "Yeah, and this way we can stick to the early morning hikes without worrying about, you know?" The line went quiet for a second. Then came the same voice from earlier, lower, but still clear enough. "Don't tell Grandpa. He'll slow us down." They all laughed, not mean-spirited, but in that easy, dismissive way that might hurt worse because it pretends there's no harm. I leaned against the wall, my jaw tight. I wanted to walk in, to tell them what I thought of this plan. But something made me pause. My eyes wandered to the living room, where the TV glow cast a soft light on Grandpa's chair. And there he was. Bent slightly forward, glasses slipping down his nose, he was carefully folding wrapping paper around a box. The paper had a pattern of little sailboats on it, perfect for the cousin who was always talking about buying a boat someday. His big hands, the same ones that used to haul ropes on a Navy ship, moved slowly but surely. He folded each corner, pressed the tape just so, then smoothed it down with a tenderness that made my throat ache. The card beside him was addressed to the very cousin who had just voted to leave him behind. That was the moment something inside me shifted from hurt to something deeper, a kind of fierce protectiveness. I finally broke the silence and asked my mom about it later while we were cleaning up the kitchen. "Why would they do that?" I said. She sighed, drying a plate. "They just think it'll be easier without him. No waiting for elevators, no stopping to rest, no worrying about finding places with benches." "Easier for who?" I asked, sharper than I meant to. Her shoulders dropped. "For them, I guess. They're not trying to be cruel, David. They just don't think about it the way you do." I wanted to believe that, but deep down, I knew the truth. They had thought about it. That's why they were keeping it a secret. The next morning, over breakfast, I found out the part that hurt the most. Grandpa knew. "I'm not going this year," he said casually, like he was talking about the weather. "I don't want to slow anyone down." I stared at him. "You knew?" He smiled, almost apologetically. "Kiddo, I've been around long enough to know when I'm not part of the plan. It's okay. I don't want to make things awkward for anyone." I didn't say anything right away, but inside, I made a silent promise. Awkward or not, I wasn't about to let him be left behind. If you've ever watched someone you love pretend they're okay with being excluded, you know the quiet pain of it. The question is, when you see it happening, do you accept their silence or break it? I couldn't stop thinking about the way he said it, like being left out was just another part of getting older, something you're supposed to accept without making a fuss. That afternoon, I stopped by his place. The front door was unlocked, like it always was. I found him in the spare bedroom, sorting through an old canvas duffel bag. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at. Inside were neatly folded shirts, a pair of khaki shorts, his navy ball cap, and a pair of sneakers that had clearly seen better days. "Going somewhere?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He didn't look up right away. "Just thought I'd be ready in case plans changed." He zipped the bag halfway and sat down on the edge of the bed. "You never know." There was something about that "you never know" that made my chest tighten. It wasn't hope. Not really. It was more like he was keeping a door cracked open, even though he knew no one was coming through it. I sat in the chair across from him. "Grandpa, when did you find out?" He rubbed the brim of his cap between his hands. "Heard your sister talking on the phone last week. Figured if they wanted me there, they'd have said something." He gave a small shrug. "No big deal. I'm not the easiest person to travel with these days." "That's not the point," I said, sharper than I meant to. He looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. That same patient smile he used when I was a kid and got worked up about things I didn't understand yet. "David, Sometimes you let things go because holding on just makes everyone uncomfortable. I've been around long enough to know when I'm more trouble than I'm worth. The words hit me like a punch. You're worth more than all of them combined, I said. He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I appreciate that, kiddo, but it's not about worth. It's about not making people feel obligated. I wanted to argue, to tell him they were obligated, that family is supposed to be. But I could see in his face that he'd already made peace with it. At least, that's what he wanted me to believe. When I left that day, I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. The summer sun was warm through the windshield, but all I felt was cold. I thought about all the times he'd shown up for me, the 3-hour drives for baseball games, the hospital visits when I had my appendix out, the way he sent me handwritten letters during my first year of college. And now, the people who owed him more than anyone were leaving him out because it was easier. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew this. If I let it slide, I'd be just as guilty as the ones who made the choice in the first place. The next morning, I woke up with a decision forming in my mind. Not the polite kind you talk over with the whole family. Not the sort you ask permission for. This was the kind of decision you make in your gut, without looking back. If they weren't going to make room for him, I would. The decision was made before my feet even hit the floor that morning. I grabbed my laptop, sat at the kitchen table, and started looking up flights. I found a direct one from Denver to the closest airport to the beach house. From there, it was just a short drive to the boardwalk. I chose seats with extra legroom, requested wheelchair assistance at the gate, and made sure the hotel I booked was on the ground floor with easy access to the boardwalk. Halfway through entering my payment information, my card got flagged for a security check. For a second, I almost laughed. It figured that even the bank was making me work for this. A quick call later, the charge went through. 2 tickets, one for me, one for Grandpa. When I showed up at his place, he was in the kitchen making oatmeal the same way he always did, with a splash of milk and a sprinkle of cinnamon. He glanced up and smiled. "Morning, kiddo." "Morning," I said, setting the printed tickets on the table. "Pack your bag. We're going to the beach." He froze, the spoon halfway to the bowl. "What?" "We leave in 2 days. Hotel's booked. Flights are confirmed." For a moment, he didn't say anything, then slowly, a smile crept onto his face. Not the polite one he wore when he didn't want to make a fuss. A real one. The kind I hadn't seen in years. "Haven't seen the ocean in 20 years, kiddo." His voice cracked on the last word. I shrugged like it was no big deal, but inside, I felt the weight of what I'd just done. I wasn't just buying plane tickets. I was telling him, without needing to say it, that he mattered enough to fight for. We spent the rest of the morning making a packing list. I insisted he bring his Navy cap. He insisted we get matching sunglasses for the photo op. I laughed, but the truth was, I'd already imagined that picture in my head. The 2 of us standing in the sand, the ocean behind us, proof that someone had chosen to make room for him. That night, I emailed my boss for a week off, citing family time. It was the easiest request I'd ever made. I didn't tell the rest of the family, not because I wanted to be secretive, but because I didn't want to give them a chance to talk him out of it. This trip wasn't about their convenience anymore. It was about giving him back something they'd taken without even realizing. The simple dignity of being included. Sometimes the best way to honor someone is to stop asking for permission to include them. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and doing what's right, you know how heavy that choice can feel. But ask yourself, years from now, will you remember the arguments you avoided? Or the moments you created by showing up for the people who've always shown up for you? Travel day came faster than I expected. We arrived at the airport early, partly to avoid rushing, and partly because Grandpa liked to watch the planes. TSA was smoother than I thought it would be. One of the agents noticed his Navy cap and saluted him as we passed. I swear I saw Grandpa stand a little taller after that. The flight itself was calm. He took the window seat, gazing out like the clouds were old friends. Every so often, he'd nudge me and point out something. A river winding through the mountains, a tiny patch of farmland, the glint of another plane in the distance. When we landed, the salty air hit us before we even reached the terminal doors. Grandpa closed his eyes for a second, breathing it in like he was storing it for later. Our hotel was just steps from the sand. I'd picked it because it reminded me of places we stayed when I was a kid. Nothing fancy, but clean, warm, and close enough to the ocean that you could hear the waves at night. The staff greeted him like royalty when they saw the cap and the service pins on his jacket. One young man at the front desk even carried our bags to the room, chatting with Grandpa about his service years. We didn't waste time. Within an hour, we were on the boardwalk with cones of ice cream in hand, watching gulls wheel over the water. People smiled at us as they passed. Two guys, decades apart in age, laughing like they'd just pulled off a heist. That night, we had dinner at a small seafood place Grandpa had read about online. Halfway through the meal, a man from the next table leaned over and said, "Sir, were you in the Navy?" Grandpa nodded, and the man grinned. "Welcome home, sailor." When we went to pay the bill, the waiter told us it had already been taken care of. Back at the hotel, Grandpa sat on the balcony long after I'd gone inside, just listening to the waves. When I came back out, he said quietly, "You know, this might be the first trip where I'm the priority, not the afterthought." I didn't know what to say to that. I just nodded, because anything I came up with would have sounded small next to the truth of what he'd just said. The next morning, we walked along the beach. The tide was low, leaving little pools full of shells and tiny crabs. He bent down slowly, picking up a smooth piece of sea glass and holding it up to the light. "Your grandmother used to collect these," he said. "She'd put them in jars on the windowsill so the sun would shine through." We stopped at a pier, where a fisherman let Grandpa reel in a small catch. His grin in that moment, the kind of pure, boyish joy you can't fake, is something I'll never forget. Meanwhile, I knew the rest of the family was at their resort. I'd seen the pictures on social media, big group dinners, matching t-shirts, carefully staged photos on the beach. But looking at Grandpa, I didn't feel like we were missing out on anything. In fact, I realized something. For the first time in a long time, Grandpa wasn't trying to keep up with everyone else. He was just here, present, seen, and that was worth more than any fancy hotel or crowded itinerary. It was on our third day at the beach when the first ripple of trouble came through. We'd just come back from a lazy afternoon wandering the small shops near the pier. Grandpa had found an old book on naval history and was reading it in the hotel lounge while I checked my phone. That's when I saw it. A message from one of my cousins. "Why didn't you tell us you were taking him?" For a second, I thought about ignoring it, but then I remembered the sting of hearing them talk about leaving him out. The way Grandpa had packed a bag, just in case. The way he'd said he hadn't seen the ocean in 20 years. My thumbs moved before I could second-guess myself. "Same reason you didn't tell him you were going without him." I hit send. It took less than 5 minutes for the next message to come in, this time from a different cousin. "Wow, guess you wanted to make us look bad." Before I could reply, my phone buzzed again. A screenshot of my message, now posted in the family group chat. The thread was blowing up, Some were defending me, saying it was wrong to leave Grandpa out. Others were accusing me of trying to stir up drama. I put my phone down and looked over at Grandpa. He was still flipping through the book, unaware of the miniature war happening online. I debated whether to tell him, but decided against it. This trip was about giving him peace, not dragging him into the mess we'd left behind. Later that evening, as we were watching the sunset from the balcony, my sister called. I let it go to voicemail, but she immediately texted, "You've really crossed the line, David. We had our reasons." I typed back, "And I had mine." I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. That night, as we walked to a little diner for dinner, Grandpa told me about the last time he'd been to this beach. It was with Grandma, years before I was born. They'd stayed in a small cottage, spent their days walking the shoreline, and ended each evening sitting on the porch, listening to the ocean. "She used to say the waves sounded like a promise," he said, smiling softly. "A promise that no matter how far you drift, you can always come home." I swallowed hard because I knew he wasn't just talking about the ocean. Back at the hotel, I checked my phone one last time before bed. The group chat was still buzzing, but now there were more people siding with me. A few had even messaged privately to say they felt guilty for not speaking up sooner. One message in particular stood out, from the cousin whose birthday gift Grandpa had wrapped the night I overheard the call. It read, "I didn't realize how much this would hurt him. Can I see you guys when you get back?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked over at Grandpa, asleep in the chair by the window, the sound of the waves drifting in through the open balcony door. For the first time in a while, he looked completely at ease. Whatever storm was brewing back home could wait. For now, all that mattered was that he was here, that we were here, and that neither of us was missing out. Our last night at the beach came faster than I wanted it to. The sky was painted in streaks of pink and gold, and the air was heavy with that mix of salt and warmth you wish you could bottle up and take home. After dinner, we walked slowly along the shoreline. The waves curled gently at our feet, leaving cool ribbons of foam on the sand. Grandpa had his hands clasped behind his back, his navy cap tilted forward to shield his eyes from the fading sun. When we reached the pier, he stopped and looked out toward the horizon. "Hard to believe it's been 40 years, he murmured. "Since what?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Since I stood here with your grandma. Same spot, different time." We stayed there for a while, listening to the water slap against the pier's wooden posts. The sound was steady, like a heartbeat. Eventually, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn envelope. "Here," he said, handing it to me. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a black and white photograph, the edges curled with age. It showed a younger version of my grandfather, standing barefoot in the sand, his arm wrapped around a woman with bright eyes and a wind-blown dress. My grandmother. Behind them, the pier stretched out exactly as it did now, weathered but unchanging. I turned the photo over. On the back, written in my grandfather's neat block letters, was a single line. "Thanks for bringing me back, not just here, but back to feeling like I matter." I couldn't speak for a moment. My throat tightened, and I felt that prickling behind my eyes that warns you a tear is coming whether you want it to or not. He chuckled softly, maybe to break the tension. "Your grandma made me promise we'd come back here every 10 years. But life, you know how it goes. Work, kids, bills. 1 year turns into 10, then 20. And before you know it, you're telling yourself it's too late." "It's not too late," I said quietly. He nodded, not this time. We walked back to the hotel in comfortable silence. In the lobby, a family was checking in, parents wrangling two little kids, juggling suitcases and beach toys. The father looked at us and gave a polite nod. The mother smiled warmly at Grandpa, and I caught the way he straightened just a little, the way he always did when someone saw him, really saw him. Back in our room, he set the photo on the nightstand next to the lamp. I noticed his hand linger there a second longer than usual, as if he was making sure it would be the last thing he saw before falling asleep. Later, when I stepped out onto the balcony, I saw him already there, sitting in the dark with the sound of the waves as his only company. I didn't interrupt. Some moments don't need words. The next morning, we would pack our bags and head back to Colorado. But standing there in the quiet, I realized something. This trip had been more than just a getaway. It was a reminder that inclusion isn't about the logistics or the schedule. It's about presence. And for Grandpa, this wasn't just a return to the ocean. It was a return to himself. The morning we left the beach, the air felt different. Cooler, quieter. The gulls were still calling, the waves were still rolling in, but there was that unmistakable stillness that comes when a trip is ending and real life is waiting just over the horizon. We had breakfast at a small diner we'd passed every day, but hadn't tried yet. The waitress greeted Grandpa like she'd known him for years, topping off his coffee without asking and slipping him an extra slice of pie for the road. He smiled at her in that way he had, gentle but full of gratitude, and I couldn't help thinking how natural it was for him to connect with people. After we ate, we walked down to the boardwalk one last time. The shops were just opening, the smell of fresh baked cinnamon rolls mixing with the salt in the air. Grandpa stopped at a souvenir stand and picked up a small jar filled with bits of sea glass. The kind you find after years of waves wearing down sharp edges into something smooth and harmless. He held it up to the light. Your grandma used to say these were proof that time can make even broken things beautiful, he said, handing the jar to me. I think you should keep this. I turned it in my hands, watching the light pass through green, blue, and amber pieces. I thought about all the sharp edges Grandpa must have weathered in his life, the loss of his wife, the aches of aging, the quiet sting of being forgotten by the very people he had shown up for. And yet, here he was, smiling, offering me a piece of beauty instead of bitterness. We spent a little longer on the pier, watching a couple of fishermen haul in their morning catch. The wind was cool and strong, pushing at our backs as if urging us forward. But when I looked at Grandpa, I saw him taking in every detail. The creak of the wood underfoot, the glint of sunlight on the water, the sound of the lines snapping in the breeze. On the drive to the airport, he was quieter than usual. I thought maybe he was tired, but when I glanced over, I saw that same look he'd had the first night we arrived. A mix of peace and something else I couldn't quite name. You know, he said finally, I didn't realize how much I'd missed this. Not just the ocean, being part of something again. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. You've always been part of something. They just forgot to make you feel that way. He didn't answer right away. Then he nodded slowly. Maybe. But I'll tell you this. You made me feel it again. At the airport, we breezed through security. The gate agent called his name for pre-boarding, and for once, he didn't wave it off. He stood up, cap in hand, and walked forward with the kind of quiet pride that made me think of the stories he'd told me about his Navy days. The flight home was calm. He dozed for a while, then woke to point out the mountains as we began our descent into Denver. By the time we reached his house, the sun was just starting to dip behind the Rockies, painting the sky in orange and purple. Inside, he set the jar of sea glass on the mantel, right next to the photo of Grandma. The black and white picture from our trip, the one he'd given me on the pier, was already framed and sitting beside it. "I'll keep these here," he said, "so I can see them every day." In the weeks that followed, the family drama never fully went away. Some relatives doubled down on their defense, insisting it wasn't personal, just practical. Others quietly admitted they'd been wrong, that they hadn't thought about how it would feel to be left out. A few even made an effort to visit Grandpa more often, though whether that would last, I didn't know. But here's what I did know. This trip had changed something between us. Not because it was extravagant or perfect, but because it was intentional. We chose it. We made it happen, no matter how inconvenient it might have seemed to anyone else. One afternoon, a couple of weeks after we got back, I found Grandpa sitting on the porch, the navy cap tilted back on his head. He was watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes up and down the street. "Thinking about the ocean?" I asked. He smiled. "Always, but I'm thinking about something else too." "What's that?" "That feeling you get when you know you're exactly where you're supposed to be." I had that down there. It's been a long time. I sat down beside him, the late summer sun warm on our faces. And for a while, we didn't say anything. We didn't need to. Because the truth is, inclusion isn't about convenience. It's about love. It's about making sure the people who've shown up for you never have to wonder if they still belong. And sometimes, it's about taking the long way around, buying the extra ticket, changing the plan, just to make sure they're in it with you. So, think about your next family gathering. Picture the faces around the table, the laughter, the stories. Then picture the faces that aren't there, the ones who've quietly stepped back because they didn't want to be a burden, or the ones who were left off the invite list because it was easier. One day, you might have to explain those absences. And when that day comes, the question you'll have to answer is simple. Did you make the choice that kept them close? Or did you let convenience push them away?